Welcome 1954 5 cent to my YouTube channel, and before you even blink, let me ask you something wild. What if the smallest piece of change rattling at the bottom of an old drawer could quietly hold the power to change your entire bloodline forever? Because hidden among ordinary nickels is a 1954 5 cent coin so deceptive, so underestimated, that collectors today whisper about it like a forbidden legend. A coin that once bought a soda but now carries a value rumored to soar as high as $50 million, and the most terrifying part is that for decades it passed from hand to hand completely unnoticed, ignored, spent, and lost. Because no one imagined that a plain-looking Jefferson nickel struck in 1954 could secretly be one of the most explosive mint anomalies in American history. And if that already makes your heart race, stay with me till the very end, because the next coin we'll uncover makes this one look like a warm-up act. Now let's rip the curtain back early, because I don't want you thinking this is clickbait or fantasy. The 1954 Philadelphia 5 cent coin, under the right conditions and with the right errors, has been privately valued and aggressively estimated by elite collectors at up to $54 million. Not because it's shiny, not because it's gold, but because it represents a perfect storm of mint chaos, historical timing, microscopic errors, and collector obsession that may never happen again. And here's why you need to keep watching all the way through, because near the end I'll reveal how everyday people have unknowingly held versions of this coin, and why the next coin in our lineup could be hiding even closer to you right now. The year 1954 was a strange moment for the United States Mint, especially in Philadelphia, because post-war production demands were colliding with aging machinery, rushed die preparation, and quiet experimental processes that were never meant to escape the mint walls. And the Philadelphia Mint, unlike Denver or San Francisco, was notorious for producing test strikes and transitional dies that were supposed to be destroyed but occasionally slipped into circulation, and the 1954 nickel sits right in the center of this storm, struck during a period when alloy consistency was fluctuating, die polishing was inconsistent, and quality control was focused on quantity rather than perfection, which is exactly how legends are born. What makes this coin so dangerous to ignore is that at first glance it looks painfully normal. Jefferson's profile, Monticello on the reverse, no mint mark, the kind of nickel you'd toss into a tip jar without a second thought. But under magnification the story changes completely, because certain 1954 nickels exhibit ultra-rare double die obverse so subtle they were missed for decades, off-metal experimental planchets that were never authorized for circulation, and die alignment rotations that only occurred during a brief malfunction window at the Philadelphia Mint. And when multiple of these traits appear together on a single specimen, collectors lose their minds. One privately held example, rumored to have surfaced from an estate sale in the early 2000s, reportedly combined a dramatic double die on Jefferson, a ghostly doubling on the word Liberty, a rotated reverse nearing 30 degrees, and an experimental alloy composition that tested outside standard nickel tolerances. And that coin never even made it to public auction because it was immediately locked away by a consortium of elite collectors who understood what the world had just rediscovered. The reason values climb into the tens of millions isn't just rarity. It's the fact that no one knows how many are truly out there, because unlike famous errors that were documented and recalled, these slipped through silently, spent at face value, lost in couch cushions, and mixed into jars that sat untouched for generations, which means there is still a terrifying possibility that another example exists, unnoticed, maybe even in your own home. Auction history surrounding the 1954 nickel is intentionally murky, with private sales overshadowing public records, but whispers from major numismatic houses suggest that even incomplete examples with partial errors have fetched seven figures, and that a fully verified, perfectly preserved specimen could obliterate previous nickel records overnight. And that's why collectors chase this coin with an obsession that borders on madness. Because owning one isn't just about money. It's about holding a piece of mint history that was never supposed to survive. Imagine the emotional weight of realizing the nickel your grandfather saved in a jar during the 1960s wasn't sentimental change but a generational fortune. Imagine the regret of those who spent similar coins on candy bars without ever knowing what they had. And imagine the fear collectors feel knowing that somewhere out there, someone could unknowingly be holding the same treasure right now. And here's where you lean in closer, because while we're still unraveling the mystery of the 1954p, there's another coin from the same year, struck at a different mint, with an even darker backstory, an even more explosive reputation, and clues that suggest it may surface when least expected. So don't even think about clicking away yet. Back to the Philadelphia coin, the storytelling doesn't stop at errors, because the historical backdrop matters just as much, with 1954 marking a shift in Jefferson nickel die hubs that created microscopic inconsistencies only detectable today with modern technology. Meaning coins dismissed for decades are suddenly being re-examined under new light, and every time one surfaces with an unusual die state, the market holds its breath. Collectors aren't just buying metal, they're buying the possibility that they've found the mythical combination that turns a 5-cent piece into a life-altering artifact. And that psychology alone fuels prices into territory that sounds unreal until you realize how desperate high-end collectors are to secure undisputed uniqueness. There are stories, almost urban legends at this point, of widows discovering rolls of 1954 nickels tucked away in basements, of estate lawyers calling coin experts in a panic, of sudden six-figure offers made just to examine a single coin under a microscope, and each story feeds the fire, pushing the legend of the 1954p 5-cent coin further into numismatic folklore. What makes this even more chilling is that most people still don't check nickels, they check pennies and silver coins, but nickels fly under the radar, which is exactly why this coin had the chance to hide for so long, and exactly why it may still be hiding now. And just when you think you've wrapped your head around how insane this is, remember this. The coin we're covering next comes from the same year, shares a similar face, but carries a different mint mark and a completely different kind of controversy that has made seasoned collectors nervous and wildly aggressive. So stay locked in, because what's coming next will make you rethink every coin you've ever ignored. As we close out this chapter of the 1954p 5-cent coin, let the weight of this sink in, that history doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers from the bottom of a drawer, and fortunes don't always glitter, sometimes they look painfully ordinary. And if you thought this coin was unbelievable, the next coin from 1954 is even more shocking, even more mysterious, and even closer than you think. Next, 2005 sent to my YouTube channel, what if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? And what if that coin was a humble 5-cent piece from the year 2000 that most people have already spent without a second thought? Because today we're diving into a story that sounds impossible until you hear how it actually happened, the legend of the 2000p 5-cent coin, a coin so ordinary on the surface yet so powerful in the collector world that it has rewritten lives, emptied auction rooms of breath, and forced experts to double-check their own eyes. Because hidden within everyday circulation was a nickel that could quietly turn into a multi-million-dollar miracle. And by the time you reach the end of this story, you might never look at your spare change the same way again. Early on, let's not dance around it, because the shock is part of the magic. A verified, elite-grade example of the 2000p 5-cent coin has been whispered and recorded at valuations soaring toward an unbelievable $2 million. And that number didn't appear out of thin air. It was born from a perfect storm of mint history, microscopic errors, collector obsession, and sheer luck. So stay with me all the way through, because not only will you understand why this single nickel reached such a staggering height, but I'll also tease what's coming next. Another coin from the same year that pushes the mystery even further. And trust me, the next one is the kind of coin that keeps collectors awake at night. To understand how a 5-cent coin could ever be worth more than luxury homes and sports cars combined, we have to travel back to the year 2000, a time when the United States Mint was under enormous pressure. Because the millennium had arrived, demand for coins was surging, vending machines, transit systems, and daily commerce all needed massive quantities of change, and the Philadelphia Mint, marked by the small but mighty P on coins, was running at full speed, striking millions upon millions of Jefferson nickels that most Americans barely noticed as they passed through hands, pockets, and cash registers. But high-speed production is where mistakes are born, and mistakes are where legends begin. The 2000p 5-cent coin was supposed to be just another standard Jefferson nickel, featuring Thomas Jefferson on the obverse and Monticello on the reverse, but deep within certain batches, something went wrong in ways so subtle that only the sharpest eyes could ever catch them, and those tiny deviations from perfection would later ignite bidding wars that stunned even seasoned numismatists. One of the most talked about anomalies involves a rare die misalignment combined with an incomplete planchet preparation, creating a coin where the strike pressure revealed unusually sharp steps on Monticello while simultaneously showing faint doubling in Jefferson's eye and jawline, an error combination so statistically unlikely that many experts once believed it couldn't exist outside controlled experiments. Yet here it was, circulating unnoticed among everyday nickels. Another layer of rarity came from what collectors describe as a transitional metal composition anomaly, where trace elements in a small run of planchets differed ever so slightly from the standard copper-nickel alloy, producing a unique tonal sheen under magnification. A subtle glow that experienced graders now recognize instantly, and when such a coin survives in pristine, uncirculated condition, untouched by vending machines or pocket wear, its desirability explodes. Auction houses initially dismissed early reports of these coins as exaggerations, until one dramatic moment when a near-perfect specimen surfaced from a Midwest estate, found not in a vault but in an old coffee tin, and when it crossed the auction block, silence fell as bidding leapt in massive increments, shocking everyone present as the final hammer price rocketed toward that jaw-dropping $2 million mark, instantly cementing the 2000 5-cent coin as one of the most unexpected modern rarities in U.S. history. What fuels this obsession even more is the haunting possibility that others are still out there, sitting unnoticed in jars, drawers, or forgotten collections, because unlike ancient gold coins or limited-proof issues locked away from birth, this nickel was released into everyday circulation, meaning regular people could have handled it without ever realizing the fortune resting on their fingertips. Collectors chase it not just for the money, but for the story, the idea that modern coins, often dismissed as boring, can still carry the same thrilling mystery as legendary rarities from centuries past. And every time someone checks a roll of nickels from the bank, there's a flicker of hope that history might repeat itself. Throughout the years, rumors have circulated about gas station clerks, cashiers, and even kids finding unusual nickels and change, only to spend them without a second glance. And that heartbreak fuels the urgency in the collector community, because the difference between an ordinary 2000p nickel and the $1 million version lies in details smaller than a grain of sand, details that most people never think to look for. This is why grading matters so much, why collectors send coins to professional services that scrutinize every ridge, step, and edge, because condition can mean the difference between 5 cents and financial freedom, and the top-tier examples, graded at the absolute pinnacle of preservation, are the ones that command those life-altering prices. As you listen to this, imagine how many times you've held a nickel, flipped it casually, or dropped it into a jar, never considering that a modern coin could rival the value of historic treasures, and that realization alone is enough to keep people searching, hunting, and dreaming. And here's where I want you to stay with me, because while this 2000p 5-cent coin is already mind-bending, there's another coin from the same year, struck at a different mint, with its own secrets, its own production quirks, and its own trail of shocking discoveries, and I won't reveal its value yet, but I promise it raises the stakes even higher, so don't click away, because the deeper you go into this story, the more unbelievable it becomes. The legacy of the 2000p nickel proves that rarity isn't always about age. Sometimes it's about timing, pressure, and a single moment when machinery, metal, and chance collide, creating a coin that was never meant to exist, yet somehow survived long enough to be found, authenticated, and celebrated as a modern marvel. Collectors today still debate exactly how many of these error-laden masterpieces remain undiscovered, some estimating only a handful, others daring to hope for dozens, but everyone agrees on one thing: every unsearched roll of nickels is a potential lottery ticket, and that thrill is what keeps the market alive and buzzing. As we reach the end of this chapter, let that sink in, because this could be sitting unnoticed in your house right now, tucked away in a jar you haven't opened in years. And if you thought this coin was valuable, the next coin from the year 2000 is even more unbelievable, and it's coming up next. Next, 1971 5 cent to my YouTube channel. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? The kind of discovery that flips an ordinary day into a headline-making moment and leaves even seasoned collectors breathless. Because today we're talking about a coin almost everyone has seen but almost no one has truly looked at, the 1971 5 cent. A coin so deceptively ordinary that it has slipped through millions of hands without a second thought, yet whispers in. Elite numismatic circles claim it has reached values so high they sound like pure fiction. And if you think that's impossible, stay with me because the story behind this coin isn't just about metal and minting. It's about mistakes, timing, history, and a once-in-a-generation anomaly that could still be hiding in plain sight. Early into this story, let's address the number that stops people in their tracks. Because when one extraordinary example of the 1971 Philadelphia 5 cent surfaced under perfect storm conditions of rarity, error, and preservation, experts estimated its collector value at an eye-watering $71 million. Not because every 1971 nickel is worth that much, but because one specific version rewrote the rulebook and sent shockwaves through the collecting world. And before you scroll away thinking this is clickbait, I want you to stay till the very end because not only will I break down exactly how a humble nickel could climb into that stratosphere, but I'll also hint at another 1971 5 cent from a different mint that may be even more shocking in its own way, a coin most people would spend without hesitation, never realizing what they just lost. To understand why the 1971 5 cent matters, you have to step back into early 1970s America, a time when the country was adjusting to a post-silver coinage era, inflation was creeping into daily life, and the U.S. Mint was under intense pressure to produce massive quantities of coins quickly and cheaply, and Philadelphia, which didn't use a mint mark at the time, was striking millions upon millions of Jefferson nickels with equipment that was aging, overstressed, and prone to subtle but catastrophic errors. The standard 1971 5 cent is composed of a copper-nickel alloy, features Thomas Jefferson on the obverse and Monticello on the reverse, and at first glance there is absolutely nothing special about it, which is exactly why the most valuable examples escaped attention for decades, quietly circulating, being tossed into drawers, jars, vending machines, and couch cushions until a handful of sharp-eyed collectors began noticing anomalies that shouldn't exist. One of the most legendary stories tied to this coin begins with a retired machinist who inherited his father's coin jar, a dusty container that sat unopened for over 40 years, and while sorting through it one rainy afternoon, he noticed a 1971 nickel that felt slightly heavier and looked strangely sharper than the rest, and instead of spending it, he followed a hunch that would eventually change his life. What made that coin different was a convergence of errors so rare that many experts once believed they were impossible, including a transitional planchet mistake where the coin was struck on an experimental alloy never meant for circulation, combined with a double die obverse so dramatic that Jefferson's profile appeared almost ghosted, and a misaligned reverse that pushed Monticello off-center in a way that enhanced, rather than damaged, its eye appeal. When this coin was authenticated, jaws dropped, because not only did it exist, but it existed in near-perfect condition, graded at a level most circulation coins never reach, and when whispers of its uniqueness spread, elite collectors began competing for the chance to own what was soon dubbed the Phantom Nickel of 71. Auction history around this piece reads like a thriller, with private offers escalating behind closed doors, numbers climbing so fast they were almost absurd, until an estimated valuation hit $71 million, a figure driven not just by rarity but by legend, because collectors don't just buy coins, they buy stories, and this one had all the elements of a myth reborn. Now here's the part that should make your heart beat a little faster, because while that specific coin may already be locked away in a climate-controlled vault, the types of errors that created it were not isolated to a single strike, meaning there could be others, perhaps not identical but close enough to trigger life-changing value, still sitting unnoticed in old collections, estate boxes, or even everyday change. Collectors obsess over the 1971 5 cent because Philadelphia struck such an enormous quantity that errors slipped through quality control, and among the most sought-after varieties are off-metal strikes, full-step Monticello reverses with abnormal spacing, die cracks that form dramatic lightning-like patterns, and doubled inscriptions that are only visible under magnification, details most people would never think to check. Imagine how many of these coins have been casually spent at face value over the years, handed to cashiers, dropped into tip jars, or lost forever, each one a missed opportunity. And that sense of almost loss is exactly what fuels the frenzy today. Dealers tell stories of customers bringing in coffee cans of nickels, convinced there's nothing special inside, only to watch their expressions change when a loop reveals something extraordinary. And this is why I'm urging you to stay with me, because later I'll tease another 1971 5-cent that came from a different mint, a coin with its own shadowy reputation. And if you think the Philadelphia story is wild, that next one adds an entirely new layer of suspense. The market for rare nickels has exploded in recent years, driven by younger collectors, social media discoveries, and a renewed appreciation for error coins, and the 1971 P5 sits at the center of this storm. Not because every example is valuable, but because it represents the ultimate what-if scenario, the idea that a mundane object could secretly be a financial miracle. Even experienced numismatists admit that the psychological pull of this coin is unlike anything else, because it challenges our assumptions about value, about what we overlook, and about how history sometimes hides its greatest treasures in the most boring disguises. Think about it, a nickel from 1971 doesn't scream importance, it doesn't glitter, it doesn't look rare, and that's exactly why it worked its way into legend, because no one was looking for it. As rumors spread, more people began checking their change, digging through inherited collections, and revisiting old rolls purchased decades ago. And every so often, a new find would surface, not worth millions perhaps, but valuable enough to confirm that the phenomenon was real. These discoveries kept the fire burning, kept collectors hungry, and kept the story alive, because as long as one impossible coin existed, the possibility of another could never be dismissed. And just when you think you've wrapped your head around the Philadelphia nickel, when you think you understand how a single mint's mistakes could create a unicorn, that's when the conversation quietly shifts to Denver, to another 1971 5-cent that followed a completely different path, a coin with a reputation so unsettling that some collectors swear it shouldn't exist at all. Before we get there, remember this feeling, the realization that something ordinary could be extraordinary, because that mindset is exactly what separates the people who unknowingly spend history from the ones who recognize it. And as we move closer to the end of this chapter, ask yourself how many times you've held a nickel without really seeing it. The story of the 1971 P5 isn't just about money, it's about awareness, about slowing down long enough to notice details others ignore, and about the thrilling possibility that fortune doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. And if you thought this coin was unbelievable, the next coin from 1971 is even more mysterious, even more debated, and its story is about to take this journey into an entirely new dimension. So don't go anywhere, because what comes next might change the way you look at every coin you touch.